Hey everybody, I'm really glad you found Suncrest Messages. I do hope you'll take a minute to subscribe to either our podcast or our YouTube channel. And you can also download the Suncrest app. There's great stuff there that goes far beyond these messages. Either way, I hope that the next 30 minutes helps you integrate faith with your life. Enjoy. Hey everybody, I want you to know that I'm praying for you. And I know there's probably a sense that you think that's the thing the pastor is supposed to say, and maybe it is. But I am absolutely sincere that in this season, my prayers are with you. And I've shifted some things in the way that I pray for our church to think I'm going to pray for everyone who's watching these videos online. So I just want you to know that you are prayed for. One of the reasons I'm focusing so much on prayer right now is because I sense some things have actually shifted fairly significantly since the first 2 or 3 weeks of this crisis. You know, in the first 2 or 3 weeks, there's a lot of tough things that happen, a lot of things that take adjusting right away, but there's also an adrenaline that goes with it. And one of the things I'm sensing from all the people around me is that the adrenaline is wearing off. And we have to prepare to settle into the next month or more of some routines and habits that we aren't used to and spending a lot of time with people that live under our roofs. So my prayers are with you because one of the things I'm noticing is that life is moving on in some ways that aren't related to the virus. You know, this week I had the chance to visit with a couple. It's a wonderful older couple at our church where the husband was just put into hospice care. It has nothing to do with the virus. I had the chance to have a conversation with a couple whose wedding is coming up right away and think, we're gonna have to make some adjustments to that. I have a friend who I had a Zoom call with, and the truth is, the reason for the Zoom call is that the marriage that they are in is in a very vulnerable and difficult spot. And I think life is just moving on this way and maybe a little bit more difficult because of the situation that we're in. You know, I've probably laughed at all the same memes you have online, the ones about day drinking and things like that. But then I was in a conversation with a friend and I got the sense that he's drinking more than he should, and that maybe a lot of people right now are reverting to some old habits that aren't all that healthy. And I just want to pray for you and ask for God to intervene in the midst of that. I know it's a very challenging time. I was on a Zoom call earlier this week with about 30 educators at Suncrest, and I was blown away by the adjustments they're making to e-learning. I wanted to offer a voice of encouragement and support to them, but I was mostly blown away by how much they're concerned for kids who are in their classes who might get lost in the shuffle, who aren't connecting relationally, and just the heart some of our teachers at Suncrest have for really engaging the students in their classrooms. So it's a unique time, and you have my prayers. And as tough of a time as it is, I gotta say this, I've served Suncrest for almost 24 years now, and this might be the most inspiring time of my whole ministry. You know, when you've led a church for a long time, one of the things you have to do is kind of look in the mirror and say, hey, whatever the church is, I'm kind of responsible for it. And if it's not healthy, that's on me. And we've had a mission at Suncrest for a long time to be used by God to change lives. And we see it happen all over the place. Marriages do get saved. People begin a relationship with God. Children grow up and live out mission. It's beautiful. But when a crisis like this comes up, I think it's a little bit of a test for our church. And I wondered, are we really ready to be used by God to change lives? And guess what? Turns out you are. And I am so grateful for all of that. I mean, I can give you lots of stories and lots of statistics, but think about this. The room we usually worship in on Sunday, last Sunday was full of people who were donating blood. We've given enough blood over the last 2 Sundays to serve 240 patients. Isn't that amazing? And then I think all the people who are giving blood, there's lots of new people that are stepping up. 40 people were donors who had never given blood before, and you're inspiring me. We've been in this partnership with our local nursing facility called Park Place, and in the first week we collected all these large print books and puzzles, all those things. It was awesome for them. And then they asked us to collect boom boxes so that they could listen to CDs in their rooms. And this is so wild to me. I was overwhelmed by the number of boom boxes you brought. Most of them were new. A couple of you went retro. In fact, there was one that I wanted to grab and throw some D-sized batteries in it, put it on my shoulder, take it to the basketball court, and relive my glory days. It would have been beautiful. But we're delivering those this week, and then right on the heels of this, Suncrest kids are writing really encouraging notes to all the residents of that facility. And it just reminds me what a difference you're making. I have a really good friend here at Suncrest who's an administrator at one of our local hospitals, and he's just been talking to me about how churches, and Suncrest especially, are stepping up and serving. Of course, we're trying to provide childcare for healthcare workers, and we're not making all these masks. You guys are making more masks than I can ever imagine. And he sent me a text just the other day that it really mattered to me. I want you to just hear what he had to say. He said, "Just want to say, I really appreciate what you're doing by trying to support us by making masks. More importantly, Suncrest prayers for our staff. I believe that is powerful, even when we don't see it or know it. We need strength, resolve, and most importantly, faith in this trial." And it's just one of my convictions that comes out when I get an email like that to say there have to be practical ways we can pull together and help. But to think that thoughts and prayers are useless is a terrible mistake. Because when we ask God to intervene on behalf of people who are serving others, it really matters. So I hope that you'll keep that up with me. You know, one of the things you're inspiring me about is your generosity at Suncrest. You've kept this pretty strong, and you know, it's really critical right now because we're trying to serve all these needs in the region, and we're trying to do pastoral care as we always have, and we're trying to deliver these services online. And a key part of the system to make that work is financial generosity. And I got to tell you, I'm so grateful for how you're invested. And if in your financial world things haven't changed yet, I think I'm in that situation. We should just consider that a movement of God to us to say, now's our time to give. And so thanks for everything you're doing in that way. You know, since this situation kind of emerged and we went online, we've started this series called Made for This. And I've been looking at some stories from the Old Testament, and today I want to talk to you about the story of Joshua. At the very end of Joshua's story, we get kind of that memorable moment that I want all of you to take away today. And so I'm going to give you this verse. I'm going to ask you to repeat it after me again, but then we'll have to back up the story to see how we get to this verse. This is what Joshua 24:15 says. It says, "As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." Will you say that out loud with me, wherever you're sitting right now? As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. One more time, out loud with me. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Now, I've been in a few of your houses, and in more than one Suncrest home, I've seen this hanging on the wall, that very verse. There's actually some ways where I think in 2020, this verse is just dominated on the Pinterest landscape or home decor magazines. And listen, I'm not going to make fun of you about that. I'm grateful for anyone who wants to say that about their house. But when you think about how Joshua ended up making this statement, I promise you it was not a painting party sipping wine so that they could put this sign up in their house. It was a grind of Joshua's life through some very difficult and unpredictable circumstances that lead him to a place of conviction to say, this is who I am. And honestly, it's with that context that I want to lead you at the end of our time together today to potentially make the same statement. To resolve in your heart and your soul, this is who I am. Now, I know there's at least 3 groups of people who are listening to this. These 3 groups are at our church every week, so I'm sure that they're joining us online. I'm going to describe those 3 groups, and I'll just trust you to categorize yourself in the midst of that. Let's say group number 1. For some of you, you would hear this verse where it says, me and my house, we will serve the Lord, and you would say, that's my story. It's the story of my life. I hold it humbly. I know I could lose it at any point, but honestly, Greg, if you take a peek into my relationships, you would see that my home serves the Lord. If you take a peek into my finances, you'd see it's true. For me and my house, we serve the Lord. If you take a peek into my emotions of these past few weeks, you'd see me and my house, we serve the Lord. And for those of you who are in group 1, you know how grateful I am for you. You bring a stability, not only to our church, but to life in our region that a lot of people are kind of being drawn toward right now. There's a second group of people, and I think this is actually a really enormous group. I think there's a big group of people who would say, yeah, for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. That's the aspiration of my life. But honestly, I'm kind of flailing right now. I definitely don't need my pastor taking a live look in at my finances or my relationships or how I've been handling the last couple of weeks, because it may not look like a devoted person who's given their whole life to serving the Lord. And I think for most people in this situation, the feeling is kind of frustration, because you do believe in God. And in real life, your hopes and your words to others and your biggest dreams for your kids, they tend to actually end up somewhere else other than centered in faith. And so you're constantly kind of reconciling that to say, I have one foot in, but is it possible I also have one foot out? And life is a little uncertain right now. There's a third group of people. Maybe this is you. They're at our church all the time. There's people who would say, hey, no, Greg, honestly, I do not construct my life in a way to serve God. And at least at this point, I'm not somebody who really buys into God or faith or Jesus or religion. And I want you to know, if that's where you are in life, I think it's part of an honest journey. I think people end up there in all kinds of ways, sometimes because of bad experiences with church, sometimes because of intellectual hurdles that are difficult to get over, sometimes because your parents were actually people of faith, but you saw them as hypocrites and you think, I want no part of that. People end up in group 3 for all kinds of reasons. And you might think that since I'm a pastor, I really have this wonderful love for group 1 and kind of a disdain for groups 2 and 3. But for me, it's just the opposite. Yes, I'm grateful for group 1, but I think my whole orientation as a pastor is to help people who are in groups 2 and 3 see that it's possible. And maybe it's possible right now in this season to take a step where you'd want to define your relationship with God in a new, conviction-oriented way. And I want you to see that I think it's both fully plausible for smart people to step into a faith in God, and it's also possible to do it in ways that are beautiful. They're not heavy-handed or burdensome. And I think in Joshua's story today, you could maybe see yourself there. So let me set up Joshua's story. If you were with us last week, I started to tell the story of Moses. And a lot of people know the story of Moses, whether you're a church person or not, because Charlton Heston did star in the 10 Commandments, or maybe you've seen The Prince of Egypt or some other story like that. The story of Moses was that he was going to lead God's people out of slavery from Egypt and toward the promised land. And one of the things that's critical about that story, because it's going to go straight from Moses to Joshua, is that as Moses was leading the people who were with Moses saw dramatic works of God with their own eyes. They were in difficult situations, but they saw the Red Sea get parted. When they were out in the desert, they saw the 10 Commandments come down from God to Moses. They were provided, get this, manna from heaven every day. It just came from God, and they ate from it every day. That's part of who they were. And Moses led the nation of Israel for a long time, all the way up to the point where they were about ready to enter into what God had always promised them, a piece of land that was flowing with milk and honey that would be theirs. And Moses didn't get to enter into the promised land. He died overlooking it. But Joshua came right after him, and that's where we pick up the story of Joshua in Joshua chapter 1. I want to read you this passage. You're going to hear the same phrase come out 3 times. Whenever you read the scriptures and you hear a phrase repeated, it's good to say, oh yeah, that matters. But I think it's the words after that phrase that'll help you know why it matters. Here's what he says. He says to Joshua, be strong and courageous. Now, this is a message for Joshua, and it's a message for me, and maybe it's a message for you today, that the word from God to us is be strong and courageous. But it's not your own strength. He actually says, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. This is not grabbing courage out of thin air. It's not just amping up yourself to think, well, I got to be strong right now. This is rooted in something. It's rooted in a promise that God made, a covenant promise that Joshua had seen kind of emerge over time. And he'd say, God, since I've seen you, that's why I can be strong and courageous. Then the passage says, be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey the law my servant Moses gave you. And then get this, he says, do not turn from it to the right or to the left. He says, if you're going to be strong and courageous, you stay focused on me. You lift your eyes up to heaven. He says, there will be distractions. There will be things that want to take you left, temptations in life, or things that you want to chase. There will be things that want to take you right, and you'll be tempted to go that direction. But if you're going to be strong and courageous, it's because you're keeping your eyes focused. He says, then you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night. I hope that's a habit that you have, just to open up the sacred scriptures and meditate on them each day so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you'll be prosperous and successful. And then he says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. You remember last week when we talked about Yahweh? It's the idea that God is above all, but he's also with us. Here we see that come back to light. He is with Joshua, and that makes all the difference. And I hope that encourages you. Literally encourages you. It gives you courage to say, I can face what's in front of me today. But then as you see Joshua's story unfold, there's a couple of interesting things that happen. He's had a little bit of success, and we get to Joshua chapter 5, and we get a description of something unique that happens that you could read over if you didn't capture how meaningful it is. Here's what it says. The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. Remember how I told you before? God had been giving them manna every single day. This is the occasion in the Old Testament where that shifts. It says the manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the produce of Canaan, the land that they were in. Now follow this with me. This is absolutely wild. God had been directly providing for them for a generation, for 40 years. And now he was moving them into a land that he described as a land flowing with milk and honey, a land where they could produce their own crops and feed themselves. And so they do. And maybe that seems like a very natural progression, a very healthy progression. Obviously, God is doing that, but something happens in them. There's a subtle shift that becomes very important to them because in their daily life, they lost one indication that their dependence is on God. It may not seem dramatic to you, but I think a lot of things that you and I work through in our lives don't seem that dramatic to us. For all their lives, they had seen right before them, every time they ate, they knew it came straight from God. And now they were going to be responsible for planting and harvesting and cultivating. And one of the shifts that happens is they start to think that they're in control instead of God being in control. It's just one move. But they figured, I planted it, I harvested it, I grew it. They stopped paying attention to the rain that's necessary and the soil that's necessary and all the aspects that God remains involved in. And just this little shift in daily life causes them to, I think, forget that now there's a difference between dependence and an awareness of dependence. And I want to ask you to think about that in your life right now. Our lives in some ways are going the opposite direction right now. There were things that we thought we had control of that we're realizing we don't have control of. And in the end, my friends, that's actually a really healthy thing. If you stopped and asked yourself, what do I ultimately have control over? Ultimately, the answer is you have control over one thing, and it's who you trust. You don't have control over the wind or the rain. You don't have control over this virus. You don't have control over all kinds of things. The only thing you control is to decide, am I going to trust myself or am I going to trust God? And I think God is the one who's in control. And so I want you just to think about this and look at the situations you're in and decide, do I trust myself or do I trust God? And so I actually want you to hear a story from a friend of mine. We have all kinds of stories at Suncrest where people's lives, were jostled about or things happen that they couldn't have expected, and they end up walking through our doors and they make a shift in their life to where they now trust God. Curtis is a really good picture of that story. So listen to this.
Danielle and I met in 2011 and hit it off right away. It was incredible. In 2016, I started a new job and things started to go south fairly quickly. Danielle found out that I had cheated on her. She was devastated, heartbroken. The family was in ruins, and I was on a downward spiral and decided to leave. And all of this time that I was doing this, I thought I had everything in control. I continued to run, and then I realized running was no longer an option. I felt like there was no more of me to give, and every decision that I was making and everything that I was doing was just hurting people, and then I just gave up. I can't explain it. I don't know still to this day what was going on inside of me, but there was a warming feeling, and I knew what it was. I knew it was God. And at the point where I was giving up, he was saying, hey, let me take over for a while. Over and over again, God reminded me that things aren't going to be easy, but they are going to be possible with him. I started to reach out to Danielle. I started to reach out to my family and all of the people that were hurt through this situation. And I started to realize that I was not in control of any of this, but God wanted to be. Fast forward 4 years of continuing to try to do things myself and trying to make decisions for myself, and then realizing I'm not in control. God is in control. I have a family again. I married Danielle in 2017. Our kids are back together. I reconciled all of my relationships and then some. If there's one thing out of 9,000 things that I've learned, it's that I think I maybe always want to be in control, and I always want to do things my way. But when I really let God in, and when I really realize that God is the one in control, life becomes so much better.
I always respect people who tell their stories because they're just real life stories. That's what Curtis's is. Yours might be more dramatic, or it might be less dramatic, but I think for almost all of us, the storyline's the same. We should all come to a point in our life where we realize we're not totally in control, and we should step in with conviction to trust the one who is. And I want to invite you to that today. At the end of Joshua's life, after a tumultuous time, after seeing God at work and also seeing setbacks along the way, he just stood in front of the nation of Israel and he said, if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day who you will serve. He said we should all just be honest about it. We all serve somebody, and we all get to choose. So who do you want to serve? Do you want to serve yourself? A lot of people choose that as the option. Do you want to serve another God? It's available to you. But Joshua says, after I've seen God's promises withstand everything, after I've sensed his presence with me, and after I've realized I don't have control, my choice is to trust him. He says, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. And then he kind of lays out the challenge to the rest of them, the challenge I'd like to lay out to you. He says, "Now then, yield your hearts to the Lord." And wherever you are right now, I want to ask you to think about taking that step with your own life. Maybe you're category number 1 and that's already rock solid for you. But if you're category number 2 and you say, yeah, I believe in God, but it hasn't really been the central defining characteristic of your life, today is the day to say, I'm defining my relationship with God. And even if you're group number 3, and maybe this has seemed odd or something that you couldn't even imagine yourself stepping into, maybe in the midst of the situation we're in, it's a realization to say, one thing is constant. It's God. And we should trust in him. You know, it's been wild to me that we've had so many people step up to be baptized, even in the midst of this season with the virus. And it's inspiring to me because I see people who are looking around at an unsettled world and saying, I'm going to plant my foot on the rock. I need to trust in the one who is trustworthy. And just like Joshua saw, to know that God is with you in a covenant. And so I want to encourage you to take a step like baptism if you've never done that before. And I'm going to lead us right now into communion. You know, for those of us who have this conviction that Jesus is the Son of God and that ultimately Joshua's story unfolds into Christ making a new covenant with us by going to the cross and dying for us, he put communion in place to draw our minds back to that and recenter us every week. And so I hope that you have some elements together there, something to drink and something to eat that can represent Christ's body and blood. And while a lot of times this is a solemn time, certainly a time of conviction and a time of reflection, I also want you to see what it can be, a time of hope. The Apostle Paul says, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone and the new is here. And I want to ask you to step into that today with some conviction. That as you eat the bread and you drink the cup, you would think, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. Well, I really hope that was helpful for integrating faith with life. Listen, if you're in Northwest Indiana, I'd love to have you join us in person. Head over to suncrest.org and plan your visit.